Mr. McCall on the need of making sure that the voice of America in those places where our adversaries have false information going through. But you cannot do that simply by reducing and ending all individuals that are work within that agency. So now, these board members, for example, that were fired, despite their political and policy differences, those members wrote, and I quote, defunding, as you have done, these networks, because you can't do anything without money, but defunding these networks at this critical moment will undermine the United States' efforts to counter the biased narratives from America's authoritarian competitors. It's crucial. Some have said that it seems as though that our adversaries under this administration has been considered or treated like they're our allies, and our allies have been treated as if they're our adversaries. Now, I agree with the experts that put this letter in. There are grave risks right now for the United States national security posed by dismantling USAGM and the broadcasters it supports. Now, one of the things I want to do, maybe we can do this and it's trying to save some time. I serve on the Financial Services Committee also, where we often engage with companies about the risk analysis that they perform before making major business decisions to outpace their competitors. And I know I hear my Republican colleagues often say that government should be run like a business. So I just want to try to just get a few yes or no questions in the time that we have, just so that I know we can either get some of the information that the chairman said you are bringing or have brought with you. So my question to you is, did you conduct or review a written analysis before placing most of the USAGM's and VOA's employees on administrative leave on March 15th, before cutting off payments to USAGM grantees in March, or before announcing a reduction in force at the VOA last Friday? Yes or no?
I've been working in media for 30 years, and in every newsroom across this country in that time.
Yes or no? Did you do?
These are complex questions. They're not yes or no questions.
Either you did a review or you didn't.
We are right-sizing an agency that has grown and grown and grown.
Did you do a review?
We've reviewed. Yes, we've reviewed.
You've done a review. Do you have a record of what you reviewed?
We have reviewed the number of employees, the number of languages, but most of all, what we reviewed was an executive order, March 14th, by the man who's in charge of the executive branch.
I want to know.
His name is Donald Trump.
Do you have a record that you can produce? The chairman said you had a bunch of things with you. Do you have a record of what you reviewed and who you reviewed to?
We reviewed the statute.
Do you have a record? Yes or no?
We have the statute, and
do you have a record?
The statute. Yeah, we can pull that statute for you.
If you have it, not the statute, the record of individuals that you reviewed, interviewed, or talked to before you committed your actions of dismantling.
I talked to a lot of people at the agency.
Do you have a record of that?
You could go back and look at emails.
Do you have a record?
Do you want me to pull emails?
I want you to show the record of what you did, Ms. Lake.
Well, you can
Don't just give me something that's not verified. Tell me, show me the record, because that's what I hear oftentimes in the business. You have to have a record. Show me the record that you did, what you did. That's all.
It's pretty obvious what we did.
Did you survey? Let me ask this question then. Did you survey employees that was there about waste, fraud, and abuse you believe was occurring at the agency? Did you survey?
We know that there's waste, fraud, and abuse.
Did you survey the employees? Yes or no?
What?
Yes or no?
These are ridiculous questions.
Did you serve? Simple answers. You either did or you didn't.
Yeah, I guess survey means talk to and ask questions.
Did you do it or not?
Sure, we did.
You did? Then you can provide those surveys. You can show us a record of who you talked to.
We did not run an expensive survey, but I talked to many people at the safety.
So you didn't do that either. So this was based on a whim. Okay.
Ranking member, time has expired. Great. I want to thank you for your 5 minutes of questioning. I'm now going to recognize Representative Smith,
Thank
for
you very
5
much.
minutes.
Chair, Ms. Lake, your actions as senior advisor are eroding American soft power around the globe. We should not be dismantling the agency that combats propaganda from the Chinese Communist Party, the Kremlin, and Tehran. Especially now, we need to be able to broadcast facts that counter Iranian state-run media spin that is essential to America's long-term interests. Your job is to tell the people of the world the truth about America. And because of that, there's a more fundamental issue I want to address today, and that is character. You see, Ms. Lake, we have both been public figures in Arizona for a long time. I've seen you in action, including your behavior in the last 2 elections. And let me be clear about something. The American people cannot believe a word you say. You ran for governor in Arizona in 2022. You lost fair and square. Instead of conceding, you embarrassed yourself and our state by lying again and again for years, blaming everything under the sun for your loss except for your own toxic politics. You lie about that election to this very day. You lied about signatures on mail-in ballots not matching those on file. Proven wrong. You lied about ballots being intentionally misprinted and then rejected in Republican areas. Total BS. You lied and said hundreds of thousands of ballots were mishandled. Zero evidence. You claimed fake ballots were snuck into batches before they were counted. Come on. You repeated these lies again and again, and you said even recently, quote, I am the duly elected governor. They just stole it, unquote. Give me a break. Ms. Lake, your new role requires you to tell the truth. For decades, whenever authoritarians and dictators suppressed the people and claimed victory in fraudulent elections, Voice of America countered those lies. I can't imagine how people fighting for democracy today and around the world can trust someone who has so shamelessly lied about her own election.
Will the gentleman yield for the question?
No, I will not.
Okay,
Ms.
well,
Lake,
just so you know,
to regain a
VOA
semblance of your credibility, I will not yield.
So
Ms. Lake, to regain a semblance of your credibility.
Factual about the evidence.
The
gentleman's time. If you did not yield,
I did not yield, and I'd like the time back. Ms. Lake, to regain a semblance of your credibility, are you finally ready to admit you lost the 2022 Arizona election?
It saddens me that you are from Arizona and you're okay with
That's
the way
a yes or no question, Ms. Lake.
It saddens me that you are from Arizona.
I guess the answer is no. Reclaiming my time.
The gentleman will suspend, will stop the clock. For all present, members are reminded to avoid engaging in personality toward the president and other members. Okay, and this is a member of the administration, so I would caution all to stay on the subjects and stay off of personalities, please. Gentleman may continue.
Yes, and in this case, these are adjudicated lies. Courts of law have determined that these are lies. These are not me saying it. You didn't just lie to the press.
The courts are really awesome
you took
right
those
now.
lies to court and lost again and again. Every one of your lawsuits failed. And a federal judge said that you were furthering false narratives that blamelessly undermine public trust. And you didn't just lie. You were formally sanctioned by the court. Ms. Lake, you have been sanctioned twice for providing false information to courts. Isn't that true? Yes or no?
I was brave enough to fight our shoddy elections, and the courts have not caught up.
That was a yes or no question. I guess the answer is no. Let me reclaim my time. You have been sanctioned by both the United States District Court and the Arizona Supreme Court for, quote, making false factual statements to the court. And you were sued for defamation by a Republican election official, Stephen Richer. He and his family were subjected to harassment and even death threats because of those lies. You told your supporters, Richer and fellow Republican County Supervisor Bill Gates, that they, quote, sabotaged Election Day. You accused them of deliberately printing the wrong image on ballots to jam tabulators and injecting hundreds of thousands of phony ballots. What a joke. And here's the thing, Ms. Lake. When it came down to it, you chickened out. You refused to defend those lies in court. You decided to take a default judgment. You are an adjudicated liar and a two-time political
Chairman, I move to
loser
take down
in
those
Arizona.
those
I have
words,
one
please.
final question.
Chairman.
Reclaiming my time.
I'd like
I
to
have one
take
final
down
question.
those
I'm not gonna
words.
yield.
It's the gentleman's
I do not yield.
33 seconds.
I have one final question for you,
Call
Ms.
someone a
Lake. You
liar.
have a chance
That's
to
not
answer.
how
Let me
you
one
treat
final
other
question.
people that
The
are being
gentlelady
questioned.
will suspend, please. Go ahead. You may
You
continue.
lost for governor in 2022 to Katie Hobbs. You lost even worse to Ruben Gallego for Senate in 2024. Well, Arizona has another election for governor next year. Will you do us all a favor and run it back and run for governor again? I yield.
The gentlelady
No more questions.
Can
respond.
I respond?
You may
That was complete insanity. I wish I could yield back the last 5 minutes of my life, actually. And I want to apologize to the people of Arizona that we have somebody who's representing the folks in one of our great parts of the valley that doesn't care about the integrity of our election. So but you weren't here. You came in late, and we're talking about USAGM today, the Agency for Global Media, and how they can put out absolute abject lies, and we can't control any. We have no say over what the editorial content is, and I would hope that you would not be okay with that. They could literally put out a lie about anybody here, and I know you've been the victim of that. I know you've been the victim. I remember the stories about you where they said you had a gay lover, and those were going out all
Mr.
over.
Chairman.
Can I
I hope
finish the
you
story?
honor what you just gave as a caution to everyone, and I moved those words.
To tell you that those kind of lies, and you said those were lies, those kind of lies could be broadcast today on VOA, and you couldn't pick up the phone, Representative Stanton, and call them and say, hey, you're putting out lies about me. You would not be able to do that because they would sue you for breaking the firewall. So lies are being told on Voice of America. It's inappropriate. You've been subjected to lies that you said were lies about you in the media before. And how would you like it if those lies were put on Voice of America right now? Because they could do it, and you couldn't do a thing about it. You couldn't stop it. You couldn't stop all those lies that you said were said about you if they went on Voice of America today. You'd have to sit and take it.
Okay, I thank the gentlelady, and I appreciate the dialogue. Ruling on the member
with providing unbiased news worldwide to over 427 million listeners, many of whom live in countries without freedom of press or freedom of the speech. And it is your job to promote the American ideals of freedom and democracy. So I wanted to start just by confirming, do you support democracy or authoritarianism?
I think that's pretty obvious. I support freedom and democracy.
Democracy. Great. Would you agree that accepting the results of a fair and free election are critical to a functioning democracy?
Would you agree that standing up and cheering for a cancer survivor would have been the nice thing to do?
Ms. Lake, this is my time.
Okay.
Would you accept that accepting the results of a free and fair election are critical to a functioning democracy? It's a yes or no question. Do you think it's essential for democracy to have a free and fair election?
We need free and fair elections.
Free and fair elections, great. Thank you so much. And yet you have, to this day, refused to acknowledge that President Trump lost the 2020 election, something that even members of President Trump's own Justice Department have admitted and multiple lawsuits have shown. And we heard my colleague from Arizona talk about what happened in Arizona. So it concerns me that you are now tasked with this responsibility of ensuring democracy around the world when you won't even accept a free and fair election. I'm also concerned by your ability to promote the American ideals of freedom and democracy, given your record defending and praising dictators. Let's look at Hungary. You previously stated that Hungary is, quote, doing it right, and that Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban was, quote, the greatest in America, greatest in caps, and, quote, and equal to President Trump. Do you stand by those statements?
I think that Viktor Orban has done a very good job at protecting his people and protecting the Hungarian culture.
And so,
I think
Ms. Lake,
if you ask people in Europe, other parts of Europe,
the question here is very simple.
They would be wishing that their leaders stood up for their people.
Is Viktor Orban the greatest in Europe? Yes or no?
I think he's done the best job in Europe, yes.
Okay. And so even Secretary Rubio acknowledged in a 2019 letter that under Orban, Hungary took a downward democratic trajectory. And yet you insist that Hungary is doing it right. I want to cover some of the policies that Mr. Orban is responsible for. would you consider banning LGBTQ pride parades like Viktor Orban has done in Hungary as doing it right, recognizing that pride parades are protected under the First Amendment?
What does this have to do with the U.S. Agency for Global
I'm asking you whether you support the policies of dictators and authoritarians or whether you support democracy. You have said that Viktor Orban is the greatest in Europe. So do you think that Viktor Orban is doing it right when he bans pride parades?
I think Viktor Orban has put the people of his country first.
So the answer is yes, you think it's appropriate that he's banning pride parades and using facial recognition technology to actually profile people that go to those parades. How about the fact that Orban and his party control 80% of Hungary's media market?
Are we here talking about Hungary?
Yes, we are, because guess what? Your agency actually is responsible for other countries
Hungary
and
is
unbiased
an ally. Can I remind you that Hungary is an ally of America?
Oh, and so you think that it's okay that Viktor Orban, the greatest in Europe, according to you, controls 80% of Hungary's media market? Is that level, free, and fair reporting?
I don't. You obviously don't like our ally Hungary. I think that
I'm asking you if you think that it's appropriate. Ms. Lake, it is my time. I'm asking you if it is appropriate that a country, Viktor Orban's government, controls 80% of Hungary's media market. It's just a yes or a no. Do you think that's okay? Think he's the greatest of all time?
I don't have an opinion on what Viktor Orban is doing in Hungary.
It's not up for debate. It's a fact that has been documented by numerous organizations. Now, not only have you supported, excuse me, Ms. Lake, I'm sorry to remind you, you are not a governor. You're not even a candidate for governor. You're here, and this is my time. Not only have you supported dictators that have supported policies that erode democracy, you also spread claims promoted by Russian state media that the Pentagon was funding bioweapon labs in Ukraine. These claims have been proven resoundingly false, even by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Do you still stand by that prior statement, Ms. Lake?
I know that many members of Congress care more about funding Ukraine.
Do you stand by that statement, which is clearly a lie?
I know that you
are responsible for an agency that is supposed to promote truth, and yet over and over again, you are promoting dictators and authoritarians and lies. So I am asking you if you stand by the statement that you made that was promoted by Russian state media that the Pentagon was funding bioweapon labs in Ukraine. Proven false by Marco Rubio. Do you stand by that statement?
I understand you're trying to get a fundraising video here.
Okay. So well, you clearly don't understand that you are actually here before Congress. Mr. Chairman, I just want to say
you had more than enough time. I gave you a few extra seconds.
I understand,
and your time has expired.
Unfortunately,
and I now recognize Representative
Ms.
Davidson.
Lake is not responding to the questions.
Can I have just 1 second to respond? Because who is going to be speaking next?
Representative Davidson is next.
Oh, may I have just 1 second to respond to that? Obviously, from some of the questions we're hearing from the Democrats, they care more about a lot of other countries than America. And we've seen that in their votes, with the money they voted just to spend in Ukraine killing people. Thankfully, we have a president in Donald J. Trump who's going to help bring peace.
Maybe we could have regular order, Mr. Chairman?
Seems pretty regular to me. Representative Davidson is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for having this hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member. And thank you, Ms. Lake, for joining us today. I'm deeply concerned that what the Trump administration is doing to VOA and all of the independent broadcast networks is harming the United States and serving our adversaries. It seems like everyone is sort of saying the same thing, even though they're using different examples. So, Ms. Lake, this is an easy question. Is it your goal to advance U.S. interests or the interests of our adversaries?
We want to make sure we are advancing U.S. interests.
Great. Thank you. And earlier, because I too have been here, a question was asked of you about Russia invading Ukraine and if Russia was an adversary. And you answered that question. But I would like it if you could just answer it again. Do you believe that Russia is one of our adversaries?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I do too. So when Trump decided to gut USAGM, the head of Russia Today, the Kremlin state-controlled news broadcaster, actually said, quote, "Today is a holiday for me and my colleagues at RT and Sputnik." This is an awesome decision by Trump. So, Ms. Lake, why do you think the head of Russia Today would say this is an awesome decision by Trump?
I'm really disturbed that we were spreading Russian propaganda and hiring Russian spies at Voice of America. Have you ever thought about that?
Well, allegedly, there is a Russian operative in the White House Office of Personnel, but you're not asking me questions. I'm asking you questions. The question is, why do you think the head of Russia Today would say this is an awesome decision by Trump?
I don't know.
Okay, well, I think.
Have you talked to them?
But at least you're honest when you say you don't know. I think that the answer is obvious, and that crippling Voice of America actually allows Russia Today to spread propaganda without any opposition. And in fact, the PRC had a similar response. And in earlier lines of questioning, people suggested that the CCP was running VOA. You sort of inferred that they
have more control over
that
VOA.
Beijing was running the VOA, had people in there. So the Global Times, a Chinese state media outlet that spreads CCP talking points, also celebrated your actions and called VOA, quote, a lie factory, pointing to their reports on human rights abuses in Xinjiang. And the Global Times also called VOA, quote, thoroughly biased propaganda poison. I feel like I have also heard that phrase used by members from across the aisle, my colleagues. And that line also could have been pulled right out of your opening statement. So, Ms. Lake, do you think that VOA's reporting on China's genocide against the Uyghurs is a lie?
You know, there's been some good reporting at VOA. I'm not saying all of it has been bad, but any time we're doing Chinese propaganda, when VOA decided to do a 2-minute Chinese propaganda video and produce it, I got a problem with that. And I have a feeling that the men and women across this country do.
Something that many of our allies also care about. And we know China's position on the Uyghurs. And so I think it's important that we report on that, and we do so in a true and factual basis. And I also think it's important to say that if you are dismantling, if you are crippling, even if you're arbitrarily shrinking without a plan, because we've heard you answer questions, but we have not been shared any kind of plan, that dismantling an agency that counters PRC propaganda and allowing it to go unchecked is something we should be talking about. Well, if we're not here, then we
propaganda
cannot
from the
counter
CCP.
it. If we're not here, then we cannot counter it. And I know you have talked about what just happened with Iran, how everybody got put on administrative leave, and then the strikes happened, and then you asked people to come back because I guess somebody had a WTF moment. But then right after that, there was a reduction in force, which you just alluded to permanently eradicate many of their jobs. And so I am just saying that we have to have folks in place to respond to crises, immediate, emergent, on the horizon, and we can't do it with only 2 people in an office using a smartphone, waiting to get direction from a security advisor who hasn't even been confirmed or brought up for confirmation from the Senate. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. I can say for myself, I appreciate that a lot in journalism are freelance journalists, and they're not constantly on the payroll. I think it's a good model that the U.S. government should look at. When are they needed and when are they not? Chair now recognizes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Lake, for being here. Since its founding to counter Nazi propaganda during World War II, the Voice of America has been a beacon of free information in repressive countries. Voice of America's parent agency, the U.S. Agency for Global Media, or USAGM, has provided access to the free press and information in over 50 languages around the world through radio, television, and internet programs. These programs, as you know, are often the only reliable news sources free from malign government, foreign government influence. The programs promote free thought, democratic values, and American credibility while countering authoritarian propaganda and disinformation. However, under your leadership, Ms. Lake, USAGM has been shattered. At the direction of President Trump, you cut programs, slashed funding, and tried to shutter our global news network. Now journalists are in increased danger, and reliable news is no longer accessible for millions around the world. The editor of the Russian state media network, Russia Today, celebrated your work to close Radio Free Europe, another USAGM subsidiary, saying, quote, "We couldn't shut them down, unfortunately, but America did it so itself." If our adversaries are cheering this decision, why make it in the first place? Why, after decades of successful work and experts celebrating the effectiveness of these programs, would you end them? Why would you side with our adversaries who spread disinformation by removing respected programs that counter their propaganda? Maybe it's just your track record and history of attacking the media. You know, during your first failed run for public office for governor of Arizona, you called reporters the right hand of the devil. Maybe it's because you have a history of sharing disinformation yourself. You refuse to admit still who won the 2020 presidential election, falsely claiming it was a rigged election. You called the January 6th insurrection here at the Capitol a staged riot. You refuse to admit you lost, both in 2022 in a gubernatorial race and in 2024 for the U.S. Senate. The disinformation you spread during your failed campaigns were paper cuts, however, compared to the gaping wounds that will take root around the world because of your destruction of USAGM. Our adversaries are already filling the massive information hole left by USAGM. The 60 shortwave radio stations Radio Free Asia used to distribute its broadcasts have been silenced since you shut them down in March. And at the same time, China has added 80 new state media frequencies to increase the spread of their propaganda. So instead of listening to free press and trusted news from Radio Free Asia, nearly 60 million people are forced to turn to the Chinese Communist Party. The spread of CCP disinformation is alarming. In Xinjiang, where Radio Free Asia brought global attention to the Uyghur genocide, as the CCP worked overtime to hide this genocide by imprisoning Uyghur journalists, spreading propaganda, and controlling news, Radio Free Asia fought back to share the true story. The CCP tried to shut down Radio Free Asia's operations. They jammed signals and arrested and intimidated journalists and their families. It did not work. Thanks to Radio Free Asia, the world knows the truth. It was spreading in China too because they translated stories into different dialects. Or at least it was, until you took over USAGM and aided the CCP by stopping their work. That's your legacy. You told the media that you would be their worst, quote, freaking nightmare. You do seem to be a bit of a nightmare to the free press, a nightmare to the truth in general, but not our adversaries. They seem very comfortable. So I've got a simple question for you, Ms. Lake. Why are you helping authoritarian governments lie to their people?
I can see why maybe China would be upset, because they lost that VOA is slimming down, because they lost their ability to push their propaganda through the VOA, which they were doing. I don't know if you were here earlier, but the CCP...
I've been watching you. Don't worry.
The CCP has a lot of control over what kind of content VOA does. You know who doesn't have control? People running the agency. The VOA could do a hit piece on you. They could lie about you. They could put the most heinous story out about you. And guess what, Representative Amo? You couldn't pick up the phone call and say, please don't do that. It's not true. They would sue you for a firewall violation. So we got to get a handle about what message we're putting out. And sadly, it hasn't been rainbows and lollipops, okay? We've been putting out a lot of anti-America propaganda, Russian propaganda.
My time has expired.
Okay, great.
I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. And I would remind my colleagues as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I get to my questions, I'd just like for the record to show that the USAGM reported to Congress that that so-called swanky building that you just saw pictures of would actually save the taxpayers $150 million. So let's be sure we get our facts straight as we try to
Can I respond
grandstand
to that?
with pictures. No,
Can I respond
I have
to that?
some other questions for you. Thank you. Ms. Lake, do you agree that the U.S. Agency for Global Media should be a reliable and authoritative news source?
Yes, and unfortunately it hasn't been.
Well, I'm glad you say that because it's really not a matter of opinion. It's a matter of law. The law requires the agency to provide news which is consistently reliable and authoritative, accurate, objective, and comprehensive. Now, you criticize the agency as not doing that, but others think that the agency was doing that up until the time that Donald Trump took office. We broadcast news to hundreds of millions of people around the world and provided a crucial counterweight to the propaganda that was coming from our adversaries. Then President Trump decided to dismantle it, USAGM, with your help and all its networks. But in my view, the most ludicrous and concerning thing that has been done was to direct the agency to engage One America News to provide content for Voice of America and your other broadcasters. So I'd like to ask you, do you think UAN, One America News, is a reliable and authoritarian news source as the law requires?
Yeah, I think they do a better job than most news outlets. They cover America.
Well, let's look at some of the things that they've said, and you tell me that if you really
And by the way, it was not my idea to do that. We
it's
were
under your direction, and from your president, who you have said is so wonderful. I'm surprised you're not wearing a MAGA hat here today. But nonetheless, I'm taking my time back.
Requested that we bring that in.
I can keep talking over you forever, but let's look at some of the things that the OAN did, which was given the contract, and they're doing it, whether it's from you or from the president that you admire so. They said the leadership there told its reporters to, and I'm quoting, minimize coverage of Russian aggression. Now, do you think that's reliable and authoritative and better than other news agencies to minimize coverage of Russian aggression?
I'm not making the rundown of what airs on One America's Voice, but they have to cover, or One American News rather, they have to cover what is of interest to them and to their viewers.
But they're the ones who now have the contract to put out the news to all these different agencies that are under your direction. Shouldn't you be aware of what kind of news they're putting out?
I don't tell them what to put on the air at Voice of America because of an editorial firewall. Apparently, the CCP has more say in what goes over the air.
Oh, I think
at
that's
Voice
being a
of
little
America.
ridiculous. I don't think China's over here telling OAN what they can cover. I don't think China told them to minimize their coverage of Russian aggression.
Talk to some of the whistleblowers.
Here's something else. Let me ask you if you think this is a good coverage. Their programming for the agency, they were told also minimize coverage of the Pope because he has been making comments about climate change and advocating action. You think that's good coverage, not to cover the Pope? You think that's reliable and authoritative?
It's not my decision on what is airing at OAN.
You're in charge.
I'm not in charge of OAN.
You got the contract with these people, so it seems like it's your decision. Here's something else. The reports say that OAN instructed its employees to report only on good polls for Donald Trump. Only on good polls, and they perpetuated the lie that Donald Trump won the 2020 election. That's the news that we're putting out to the rest of the world under your leadership.
They were one of the only outlets that had the courage to cover elections.
Oh, please. You're going to say we're going to only cover good polls for Trump and still continue to say that the 2020 election was rigged, and that's the news we're putting out to the rest of the world, and that's the ones who have the contract.
Let me see if I can pull the phone number for the person who runs OAN, and you can have a conversation about the content.
I would hope you have the phone number. You're the one who's
worried about the content on Voice of America.
If you're worried about the content,
that has
then
been
why aren't you
supportive
worried
of our
about what
adversaries?
these people are saying? They're supposed to be under the law, authoritative, and reliable. And now suddenly, after knowing all these details about the number of spies and what the Chinese are doing, you don't know what OAN is doing, and that's the ones you have the contract with. I find that either
we don't have a contract with them. We have an agreement if we want to air their
an agreement. And I can't believe that. I can't believe you know everything about all these other agreements, but not about the one that's doing the news for us, that's supposed to be reliable and can't cover the Pope, can't cover Russian aggression, which would mean Ukraine, can't cover that the election was legitimate, can't cover any negative polls from the president. I'm shocked.
This is just one
I yield back.
option.
I yield back.
It's the best news I've heard all day.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair now recognizes.
Heard 3 or 4 or 5 members from the other side of the aisle say thank you for bringing reform.
You're welcome.
No, but let me finish my sentence, please, because that's not what you're bringing. They obviously didn't hear your testimony. They did not read your testimony. And I'll read part of it. And you said it again today. I was sworn in at USAGM on March 3rd, and it became clear in the following weeks, today you said in days, that reform was not possible. They missed your premise. Reform's not possible. You figured that out in days. When asked what review you had done of this very large agency, you had no answer.
I do have an answer.
Excuse me, this is my time. You'll wait for my questions. You then went on to say, this is filled with a bloated staff who hates America. You have been holding up photographs after photographs, including the image of the President of the United States. I feel like I am suffering through a propaganda war through your testimony. So I can see why the other side of the aisle, which is now not here, was utterly confused and congratulating you for wanting to reform this agency. No, because here's what you said. And I'm a former professor of writing. I'm somebody who is really skeptical of euphemism. You've said over and over again, you just want to reduce it to its statutory minimum. And then you said, and that it will be gone by 2026. You want it gone. The president wants it gone by 2026. I ask unanimous consent to enter onto the record this article, Moscow and Beijing rejoice at the looming death of Radio Free Europe, VOA. I ask unanimous consent. Thank you, Chair. No, that is not for you to speak to. That's what we do here. This article, Chinese propaganda surges as the U.S. defunds Radio Asia. I ask unanimous consent. Our adversaries are delighted with your plan, delighted that you'll be stripping this thing out. And I'm puzzled. My question really today is for Republican members. Think of the vaunted VOA. I have had the opportunity to visit VOA and many of the journalists who have worked at VOA. It is something that this country has been very proud of. And yet in your beginning testimony, you talked about, oh my goodness, USAGM, quote, hires a large number of foreign nationals, including from countries hostile to America, and uses J-1 visas as a shadow jobs and backdoor immigration program. Number one, again, propaganda, misinformation, J-1 visas are non-immigrant visas. Number two, and this is just a question of logic and basic understanding. Think about it. Many of the journalists who report through these supported networks are native to the countries in which it is critical to transmit accurate, factual, and legal, linguistically fluent information. Of course, they should be hired. But you use as though that's a bad thing. Large number of foreign nationals, as though there's some other, as though there's a reason to demonize them. Foreign national journalists who actually understand what's going on.
We should hire American.
You know what? Voice of America is not only about talking about America, it's about reporting on the world. And millions of people for decades have relied upon it. So for those of you who think this was about reform, it's not. It's about shutting down media. If you really wanted to reform it, if you really thought there were places to change, and I'm sure there are places to improve, then you would have spent more than a few days and come to a more serious conclusion. That's my worry about you in this position. You're just not serious about it. You are a propaganda machine for the Trump administration. It is an incompetent review that you have completed. Well, actually, you didn't complete it. It sounds like you never even started it. You didn't interview anybody. You've never run an agency like this. You're a former journalist, apparently, allegedly. Although I don't trust your journalistic integrity when you hold up a single picture of a newsroom at a single moment in time and think that reveals anything. It reveals nothing. It's evidence of nothing. I don't know if they all just went to lunch. Who knows what that's a picture of?
Have you ever
Your
worked in a
journalistic
newsroom?
integrity, I've been to many newsrooms. Your journalistic integrity is shot. My son has an expression that he taught me years ago, that trust and credibility is gained in drops and poured out in buckets. Sadly, you have poured out that trust and credibility over years. But I see why Mr. Trump put you in this position. He doesn't want a free press. He doesn't want Americans, soldiers across this globe hearing the facts of what's going on. He doesn't want our adversaries to actually know what's going on. Look at what we're up to today. We can't get the facts. We can't even get a briefing on an attack by the United States using our exquisite military expertise from the President of the United States and those who put it forward. We can't get at the facts. All we're getting is propaganda. Totally obliterated the nuclear program of Iran. We have to rely upon that as our news source. I'll be going to a SCIF to try to get whatever little information we can. But honest to goodness, I have no question for you, because you don't have any credibility. You have misled this other side of the aisle with some notion of reform when you even say you don't want reform. You just want to collapse the doggone thing. You fired people. You let people go. You misled this committee, worrying about who was vetting the hires. You didn't bother to say that in 2018 to 2021, the new hires were vetted by DOD. You've misled this committee. You're misleading America. You did it in your own state through your own elections. You did it with the presidential election. You've lost your credibility. You've poured it out in buckets, and I yield the remainder of my time.
Okay, well, let's start. I agree that we have an exquisite military. I've never heard it referred to by that, and I think that you would have been fighting, and hopefully you were fighting, Representative, when our military were being summarily fired because they didn't want to get an experimental shot. So hopefully you were sitting in that chair, standing up for the men and women in our military, being fired from the military. And hopefully you are opposed to the CCP propaganda that has snuck in to the VOA. But I'm not sure if you are. And you talk about, you talk about me being upset that we're hiring foreign nationals.
Madam Chairwoman, I really am not asking for any response, so I would ask that this stop. I don't know whose time she is on.
Thank you very much. I now recognize myself to ask questions, and I want to thank the committee chairman.
Madam Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity, Ms. Lake.
Hi.
So I want to address a couple things that was just recently said. Representative Burchett was trying to imply with his questioning of you that it's just Voice of America is a relic. I just looked it up, and 354 million people listen to it every week. So I would hardly qualify or classify that as a relic.
Those are government numbers, and I don't trust those numbers.
Well, that's a sad state of affairs when you don't trust the government that you're representing and that you're working for and an agency that you're in charge of. That's a pathetic statement to tell the American people that you don't trust the government that you're leading. So next,
the most American people don't trust this government.
This is my time. And so, and Representative Kim, I share your concerns. I was comforted to hear that she expressed concerns to you that, quote, I wrote it down, she worries about the U.S. ability to win the information war going forward. And I share that concern. I'm very concerned that we are ceding ground. In her own statement, she said that the Voice of America is vital in contradicting the CCP China propaganda, and I completely
but it's
concur
sharing
with her.
CCP propaganda.
So no, we are countering their propaganda. So I have some questions. You know, I just want to make sure that I have the record correct and I have your statements correct. You have called the Voice of America anti-American propaganda, correct? And I think you're implying that today.
They have put forth propaganda from other countries. Sadly, I'm very sad about that.
And you do consider Voice of America to be a biased agency, is that correct?
They have been, yes.
Okay. And you agree that the characterization of Voice of America's track record is unsalvageable and appalling, is that correct?
Pardon me?
You think that the Voice of America's track record is unsalvageable, correct?
I think that this agency, U.S. Agency for Global Media, is unsalvageable, that we can pull parts that are decent and we could work with, and that would be VOA.
Yeah, and the thing that's so stunning is that this is an exact set of messaging put out by the Chinese. That VOA is a frontline propaganda tool. VOA is widely recognized as Washington's carefully crafted propaganda machine. This is Chinese propaganda that you are restating
you're right. VOA
as an
is
American
putting out
official.
Chinese propaganda.
No, excuse me, but that is absolutely outrageous. That what is happening now is that the Trump administration has gone from 71 employees to 2. 71 to 2 of the people running Voice of America in China.
That's not true.
And now we have a situation where you are essentially parroting the Chinese propaganda. It's for the dismantling of Voice of America. So what do we have? We have the Trump administration cutting all service personnel of this agency. We have the head of the Trump administration who's over this agency parroting Chinese propaganda. And all we are doing is ceding America's critical voice. We are the counterbalance in the world of democracy against China, against North Korea, against Russia, the Americans, the United States government. We are the voice. We are the voice of democracy. We are the voice that the world relies on for accurate information, just as Representative Kim implied in Iran. A member of the opposing party, this is Republican and a Democrat agreeing that the Voice of America is critical, and you are gutting it, dismantling. If you had concerns, why don't you just fire the people who are giving information you don't agree with and hire some others? Why are you just throwing the entire agency out, ceding America's role in the world of information to the Chinese, our enemy of disinformation? You know, we have had multiple hearings of this committee, being very concerned over propaganda and disinformation that the Chinese are propagating in our country and throughout the world. And instead of stepping it up and fighting harder and bringing American might to the fight and the truth of what we believe in, we're saying, take it. You can have it all. We're just going to go away because we don't believe what we're doing anymore. And that is absolutely outrageous. We are ceding all of our soft power in the world to our adversaries because the Trump administration doesn't believe in accurate truth. And I just cannot for the life of me figure out why it is that you want to do it. It's just unconscionable to me. And unfortunately, I'm out of time. I yield back.
Maybe you should run for president. Because
I'm a member of Congress and I'm very happy where I am. Thank you.
Okay. Well, because the president won with an overwhelming mandate. And the president has the right to put forth an executive order. And I have the duty to effectuate that executive order. We have roles and
responsibility of oversight as members of Congress, and that is exactly what we're doing. And I don't think the president campaigned to cede all of American propaganda, all of American information to the Chinese. I don't think that is exactly what he ran on. I don't think that's what the American people voted for. So I disagree with you completely.
I can see that.
I guess my time is out. So thank you.
Chair now recognizes Representative Biggs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Lake, thank you. I appreciate your testimony. It's become clear that one of our most urgent concerns is how our own
over and over and over again, Russian propagandists tell us you can't trust the VOA. They're a phony organization. They tell a lot of lies. And you are here today repeating that Russia propaganda point. Again and again and again, Chinese government agents tell their people, do not believe the Voice of America. They tell lies, and you are here repeating that Chinese propaganda point. What's particularly illustrative is my colleague said, you know, you have 300 to 400 million listeners per week nationwide, worldwide, and you said you can't trust that number. It comes from the government. That number is quite consistent with the numbers issued by the Trump administration in 2017 and 2018. Everybody in this room knows that I don't trust Donald Trump. Now they know you don't trust Donald Trump. Having administered that agency for 4 years, issues numbers as to how many listeners they have, and you say don't trust them.
That's because
now, excuse me, it's my time.
Trump.
Ms. Lake, do you know the rules here? Follow the rules. Now, you had your opening statement. This is my 5 minutes. Mr. Putin wants to weaken America. There are those in America who want to help him. Those who want to help Putin know that they can't just scuttle an American aircraft carrier. So they're trying to do something that is far more dangerous to our role in the world and our national security, and that is to scuttle our international broadcasting. Now, we have a bipartisan Armenian caucus, 2 chairs, 2 co-chairs. You have eliminated all Armenian language broadcasting. Did you consult with any of the chairs or co-chairs of the Armenian caucus in Congress before you cut off that broadcasting? That's a yes or no question.
Nope.
That's how decisions are made. And I'm sure you didn't consult with the U.S. ambassador in Yerevan either. I'd like unanimous consent to put in the record a report from the U.S. Office of Special Counsel detailing the terrible administration of USAGM during the latter months of the Trump administration. I'll point out that Ms. Lake tells us how terrible it is that she can't get information. You know who really needs information? Congress. You know who's sitting behind you? Mr. Michael Pack, the former under Trump director, same job you have, who we had to try to subpoena to come here and give Congress information, and we got stonewalled. But had we had Mr. Pack here, in your testimony, you talk about how there's waste, and we would have detailed all the waste of your Trump-appointed predecessor, and how the $1.6 million of personnel claims that you cite occurred chiefly under the Trump administration. So you're here basically saying that you don't think that we can't have international broadcasting because you can't run it. The idea that you say, well, China is telling Voice of America how to broadcast. Of course, you try to interview Chinese diplomats. You interview members of Congress. That does not mean, I tell all the LA Times what they should do all the time. They tend not to listen. Every journalist is given advice by everybody in the world all the time. Now, I think Ms. Kim did a good job of illustrating the problems with closing down our broadcasting efforts. Our soft power is of critical importance, and I think Putin would be very happy. Now, as I pointed out, there are many settlements of due to law breaking and violations that you cite, and of course, they occurred back in 2020 under Mr. Pax. No wonder he refused the subpoena. No wonder he wouldn't testify here. No, I will give you credit. You're here. And you're here defending the indefensible, which is that America should be silent on the world stage. Our ability, bombs are powerful. Truth is more powerful. Taking the bombs away from our military would be bad. Taking truth away from our public diplomacy efforts is worse. I yield back.
I now recognize my